Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
It's time for you to join the Mixed Reviews Patreon. That's right, if you join our Patreon, you get bonus episodes as well as extended episodes. This episode has 30 minutes extra of content alone. And what's missing from this episode? Well, there's more talk about Psycho, more talk about Peeping Tom, more talk about Child's Play and Ozploitation, and much, much more. If you're only listening to the podcast version, you're only getting half the story. So join us on the Patreon. Go to patreon.com/themixreviews, and we'll see you there. We'll be waiting.
Ooh, Gavin. Ah! Hey, Gavin.
Acting.
Acting.
Ah.
I love that you have a full goblet. Really, the goblet with the fire in the background
Candle in the background.
and the murder weapon is really what is giving the
Well,
spooky, ooky, creepy crawly season vibes.
I also have this just in case.
Yeah,
You need some
mask for
heavy
mask.
breathing.
Yes.
Mask for
yes.
mask. Yes.
If a spirit does come over you and you do want to murder, you're ready to go.
Exactly. I have my props. I am all set.
This is welcome everyone. Hi, this is the Mixed Reviews.
We are a film podcast where we take a film subject such as an actor, director, or mini genre. We take a whole month, we watch as much as we can, do as much research as possible, and we stab it all back into you.
Oh, God.
No?
Not stabbing. Yes,
It's fitting.
This is our spooky ooky episode where I have to Gavin tortures me all season and we watch something spooky ooky. This time it is double the trouble because we are not alone. There's a stranger in this house. But we are so...
The call is coming from inside the house.
I know, yes. We are so excited. Please welcome to the Mixed Reviews. It is author, film girly. It is Maria Lewis.
Hi.
Hello. I love that, and this is not me Instagram stalking, though. If I were a psycho killer, I would be Instagram stalking. I did notice that you have on your Instagram like a great like slideshow of all the things that you've been on, where it says screenwriter, author, pop culture etymologist.
Love that. Love that.
I also say great rack shit personality, but each to their own. I like that you were keeping it classy. But yeah, I mean, like, those are all the things that I am. I'm a screenwriter in film and television by trade. I started out as a journalist, but I also do pop culture etymology. For those that don't know, is basically just the tracking through of pop culture. Like, where did a thing come from? What does it mean? Where is it going? And then obviously the author shit, which is like one of my true passions. I'm the author of 10 books. I've got a best-selling fantasy series. 10, I know. As many as in the Saw franchise. Isn't that interesting?
Iconic.
Me and Saw, we both started in Australia, which is cute.
That's a good connection.
It is like people forget that shit. Australia is really bad at supporting their own, especially supporting their own genre creatives. And Lee Winnell and James Wan, of course, who came up with Saw, are Aussies and made their short film here and tried to get it sold, couldn't, and then went to LA and sold it in like a weekend. And I was like,
Wow.
boy, if that's not the Australian story in a fucking nutshell, then I don't know what is. And the government having to pay them all this money to come back and shoot their multiple billion-dollar franchises now. It's like, that's her story, you know? That's who we are as a country. That's it. We'll make like 10 incest dramas in the fucking outback, but heaven forbid the genre film that somebody actually wants to see.
We're going to get into some specific genre, but before we do, we have a little bit of old business. Our last episode was all about Faye Dunaway. the camp icon. What a fun episode. We just had a blast watching for that and recording. We asked you guys to go online and vote for your favorite Faye Dunaway movie, and here are the results. Chinatown came in at last place with 12%, Bonnie and Clyde with 20%, and it was a race to the top. We had Mommy Dearest, which I famously said was my 1-star review, came in at second place with 33%, and Network, which was across the board our 5-star review, eked it out at 35%. We did have someone mention that they loved The Eyes of Laura Mars, which to them I say, do you have any Faye Dunaway favorites?
Well, I just love the no one.
Yeah, it is. That is a movie where you get fucked up and just like go on the roller coaster of full craziness. That was a wild movie.
I think the Oscars, Moonlight La La Land, is my Faye Dunaway moment.
What a good performance.
You're not wrong.
That's the one. She bought it. I bought it.
Okay, well, thank you, Faye Dunaway. What a great episode.
We're putting her back in the closet with the wire hangers.
Yes. And we are moving
Not in the closet.
We are moving right along. Maria, tell the listeners why we are here today. What are we talking about for our annual Ookie Spooky episode?
Okay, so we're talking about one of my favorite subgenres of cinema ever, which is slashers, henceforth, where we were all a bit like, everyone's making air jerking off or knife gestures right now. It's very cute.
Yeah, you can't tell the difference.
I mean, it's phallic symbolism. One here, whatever it takes. But specifically, the reason you guys asked me to be on is my 10th book. It's just my first crime novel. As mentioned, I've written a fantasy series, and I have a book for Marvel and another Assassin's Creed novel that comes out in a few months. But my very first crime book, The Graveyard Shift, has just been released to the world, and it is a pop cultural slasher that, very much exists in the shadow of things like Wes Craven's Scream and John Carpenter's Halloween, obviously, but also speaks to the 90s slasher resurgence, of which was a pivotal moment for me growing up as a quote unquote horror girly. But also being somebody who just loved the mechanics of a slasher. I think that's one of the big things I'm attracted to about the subgenre is there are very clear rules as outlined beautifully by Randy in Scream.
Jesus Christ, you don't know the rules?
Have an aneurysm, why don't you?
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex. No! Big no-no! Big no!
I'm a dead man.
Sex equals death, okay? Number 2, you can never drink or do drugs. No, the sin factor. It's a sin. It's an extension of number 1. And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back.
I'm getting another beer. You want one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back.
And then re-outlined by Randy again in Scream 2.
Number 1, the body count is always bigger. Number 2, the death scenes are always much more elaborate. More blood, more gore. Carnage, candy. Your core audience just expects it. And number 3, if you want your sequel to become a franchise, never, ever...
How do we find the killer, Randy? That's what I want to know.
And then outlined again by other characters who are not Randy from 3 onwards in a less appealing way. But it's the mechanics and the structure, I think, that are so interesting. And because they're so clear, seeing the ways that people subvert those is very, very intriguing and interesting to me. And as a woman, like, we are often the ones that horror happens to within the genre.
Yes.
We are primarily the first victims, right? And so the archetype of the final girl and that pushing forward and pushing through post 70s, 80s into the 90s and now into this era where we're getting very really interesting, complicated, prickly final girls that also exist in the televisual space as well. That was something that, not to be a wanker and be like, if you can see it, you can be it. But the fucking hard bang, Nev Campbell's hard bang and punching a bitch in the face and Scream, I was just like, oh my God, is this like representation matters? You know,
Wow. Women's stories matter. Women's stories
women's
matter.
stories matter, you know, and like I'm Pacifica, so I didn't get to see a Pacifica final girl until you know, there's somebody inside my house from Halloween season a few years ago. But still, it's just like the type of women that they are who have to overcome adversity, I think is a big part of the reason why people are drawn to slashers, but also particularly why the queer community and queer horror lovers are drawn to slashers, because there is something like quite fun and camp and kitsch about the idea of the masked killer and like leaning in. There's always a wisecracking best friend and people fucking with those stereotypes as well. In a lot of those incredible, like, you know, Happy Death Day is a really fun example of that. Totally Killer that just came out with Kieran Shipka is also like doing a subversion of that. And fuck, what was that Vince Vaughn movie? I feel like it's just called Killer. Freaky, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Freaky, which again, brilliant. Like the rules of it, what are the rules of a slasher? They're very clear. And then finding different conventions to fuck with them, whether that's time travel, whether that's body swap, whether that's like Groundhog Dayism. That's very appealing to me and very exciting.
Yeah, totally. I famously am not a spooky bitch. Gavin is the ghouly girly of us both. But it was very difficult but fun to go back. I mostly focused on like the golden era. Just because I did grow up with Scream and I watched it and squirmed my way through. I don't know how many Screams I've seen, but I was squirming. I Know What You Did Last Summer. Like that was, you're right. Like slasher films have become like this subgenre has become really ingrained in pop culture and like the way it spits it back out to us. It's really interesting. And so going back and realizing that there is so much camp, like there is definitely horror, but like, and finding like all the freaky ways that they like use to kill like these victims. What's the movie? The Town That Dreaded Dawn or something?
The Town That Dreaded Sundown?
The Town That, oh my God, stop. What?
With the trombone?
Oh my God. What? A fascinating, because The Town That Dreaded Sundown was technically in that category of like, you have your, you know, your Halloweens, your Psychos, even your Alice, Sweet Alice, like those types of ones that were sort of like the pioneers of the genre, right? And then there was the next level, which was like your Friday the 13th, your Prom Nights, etc. And then there was like this C-grade wave of slashers, of which The Town That Dreaded Sundown was technically a part of, and included things like Sleepaway Camp, where, you know, like you have somebody getting fucking vagged to death with a curling iron, right? Like you have all these outlandish, ridiculous bits like the famous trombone death. But there's a really, and I can't believe I'm about to use this word, beautiful remake of The Town That Dreaded Sundown that came out, I believe, in 2014. That is incredible. It's got Addison Timlin in it. She's amazing. And it's just like very, very artfully done. They kind of shoot the whole thing like a play. Like there's these really long takes and it sort of shifts through in various capacities as they're moving through the scene. It is a banger. Highly, highly recommend. Very tonally different from the original, so don't go in expecting that. But I was like, wow, what a choice. Choices were made.
Yeah. Gavin, what about you? I mean, you live, laugh, love. This is your bag.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember I was thinking about this, like going through all the slashers I've seen, and I remember like 6th grade lunch table, and this girl named Heather, and I don't even remember Heather's last name, like beat by beat describing Wes Craven's New Nightmare to me and describing Halloween 6, Curse of Michael Myers to me. And I was like, I love these things that I have not seen yet because I am 12. And that's my very first. And then I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Tim, who I feel like I'm always shouting out because he showed me so many movies in his basement, which sounds creepy, but is not, just so everybody knows. But truly a lot of these films I never would have seen without him. And, you know, anywhere from like Proto Slasher Eyeball, which is a Lenzi giallo movie from the 70s that has maybe my favorite whodunit reveal in a movie ever, which I will not spoil, but go like seek out Eyeball. It's ridiculous. And so, yeah, like I've been a huge slasher fan since the beginning, but I agree. I think there's something, you know, I think that the sort of interesting bits is analyzing the way that a lot of these movies, even the big budget ones, even the ones that were being made by studios, like are subverting expectations. I was thinking about this, and I know we're not even into the rewind yet, but I was thinking about this, that there's a clear line to be drawn between like Roger Corman making movies for teens and like then we did a John Hughes episode a couple years ago, like John Hughes making like quote unquote serious movies for teens. But in between there, like the only place you're really seeing teens in movies where they're being treated like people and also meat is slashers. Yeah. My friend Tim wrote this post the other day that he rented some or bought some slasher movie that he'd never seen from the 80s. And he was like, oh, I remember when I was a kid thinking like, this is the only movie I've seen teen girls talk to each other in. And this must be what teen girls talk to each other about when boys aren't around. And I was like, what a smart observation, because like, yeah, there's all these, from like 79 until, till the first wave of slasher dies in like the mid 90s. It's all these like teens, and like you get the original Black Christmas. There's a lot about abortion in that movie and body autonomy, and
they give the teen characters interior lives in a way that I find, like that is such a good point, because it's the girls too, because so often it's like women are positioned as the characters of the main characters and the supporting characters. You have your final girl, you have your best friend, and the inherent like other like flow on effect of that is that they have to have lives. They want to
party. They want to party. They want to fuck. They want to like.
They want to fuck.
There's a lot, and when I was watching these, I was like, I know a lot of like these movies. Like, what's the central anxiety? Like the killer. Like there's an anxiety amongst the people, and there has to be a reason. And for a lot of the girlies especially in the early days, I'm like, the anxiety is like these writers and directors being like, a girl's fucking like the anxiety is literally just that. But yeah,
and that's another thing we can get into our rewind. But it's also really funny that the people who hated horror movies, specifically slashers, the most were conservatives, when a lot of slashers were pushing the most conservative idea, which is like, don't drink, don't do drugs, don't have premarital sex, like, or else somebody's gonna come and cut your head off and shove it in a toilet.
Yeah, where are your kids?
But it was also one of the first genres that pretty accurately, outside of something like a fucking, Rebel Without a Cause and shit, that showed how teen life was. It is, not to everyone. There's always like a virgin or a few virgins in the group, like debating teens are people too. But that idea of like teens drinking and smoking and being into debauchery. And I'm so glad you brought up Giallo, because I feel like Giallo as a genre had all the style and slashers had all the structure. And often when I watch Giallo movies, one of the big things, like they're so like visually lush to look at and you want to lick them. They're just so, they're fucking gory and horrible, but like so deliciously shot and so beautifully designed. But it's oftentimes, to me, the thing that is always like the sort of one step back is story-wise, they're never as good. The scripts aren't quite as tight. The performances and the direction and the visualization's great, but it's the scripts and the story that let me down. Whereas with slashers, honestly, so many of them look shit, are not visually super interesting, or they're just ugly to look at. And there's always like exceptions to that rule. And I think now we're in this really interesting era where even a budget slasher can look amazing because people are so crafty about how they use their money and where they get it from and how they apply it. But that was the thing that slashers had, was the structure, and Giallo had all the style. And it's the merging of the two and the flow-on effect of them both that's really fascinating.
With that being said, Gavin, why don't we get into the rewind?
Maria, I'm not putting you on the spot, but I did want to give you a moment to talk about the slasher genre of books, because all of my research was towards film, and I was talking to you earlier and you brought up this idea that like there's been a big history of slasher novels. And so I wonder if we should talk just a little bit about that before getting into film itself, because it sounds like it predates.
Yeah, because essentially what is a slasher at its core? It's a crime story, right? In its very purest form. And the history of penny dreadfuls goes way back to turn of the century, 18th, 19th century. So not an unusual genre, not something that's unheard of, but as the popular stories tended to start to become more gothic with things like Dracula, Frankenstein, Phantom of the Opera, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Invisible Man, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, things like that. The slasher in literary form, it didn't exist. It wasn't called that, but like crime stories were different. And as sort of like slashers were starting to exist on screen, your Psychos, your Texas Chainsaw Massacres in a way, even your Halloweens, it was tied in with an uptick of this literary slasher, which was sort of happening textually. And it was for people who had been reading things like Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys and were wanting to graduate into something a bit saucier, a bit gorier, a bit scarier. And it's, that they were like the sort of transition books. And I Know What You Did Last Summer was that, it was a literary slasher first. And it changes, obviously, for the film version and the TV series version, I should say, because there's a TV series now that exists. But it was always a genre that really fascinated me because I loved Fear Street growing up, which is like, has different elements. There's supernatural stories and there's, quote unquote grounded ones. But those ongoing horror series was a really big deal when I was a teen and a tween. And just kind of
I used to sneak into my sister's room and read hers. She doesn't know that. So, hi, Nikki.
For me, when I was coming up with the idea for writing The Graveyard Shift, it was inspired by specifically the 90s slasher resurgence, but also there was starting to be a few literary slashers popping back up in the market. And this is like, 2010s, thereabout. And I would read them. I would get really excited to read them. And then I would get to the end and be really mad because they were all written by men who were writing under female or gender neutral pseudonyms. Because, of course, the climate had shifted enough that it's like, man, if your whole book is called The Final Girls, or it's all about women and PTSD and what it means to be a grown lady with trauma, where were the literary slashers about women written by women for women? Like, where did those exist? And so it was just really giving me the shits because I was just like, I just don't know if I can read one more fucking book about one more literary slasher about a traumatized girly and get to the end and it's a fucking man who's like, I don't know, I believe women are people too. Isn't that important? I'm like, I guess. So that was a big part of the driving force for me writing The Graveyard Shift, which follows a woman who hosts a radio show called The Graveyard Shift. For anyone who's worked in radio, that's the slot that's usually, from about 11 p.m. to about 6 a.m. onwards. It's considered like a dead zone. And on this radio show that she hosts, it's a hip hop horror show because I was always fascinated between the intersection of hip hop and horror. There's a musical subgenre called horrorcore, which is basically hip hop songs about horror. And it's bands like Ghetto Boys, for instance, are probably one of the best examples. Mind Playing Tricks on Me. Snoop Dogg was a part of it. Gravediggers, people like that, Exhibit, DMX, etc., etc. And now it's shifted into including more women. Meg Thee Stallion, Doja Cat, Dizzy Faye. There's and Ash Nico. There's now this whole subgenre of women who are rapping about horror movies or using horror movie tropes in their songs. And so that was sort of the space I wanted to tap into. So this overnight radio host has a Halloween show. One of the callers gets killed live on air. And without any spoilers, it's a movie-specific death. And so the main character, Tinsel Monroe, who hosts the radio show, and her sister begin this quest where they sort of like racing against time to figure out who is killing these people and why. And what do movies have to do with it? How does this tie into pop culture and specifically Australian pop culture? Because the book is set in Melbourne, which, not to brag, is Australia's best city. But it's also the birthplace. Oh, there we go. All the Sydney people are like, and unsubscribe.
Oh, wow. My email's blowing up right now.
But But it's also the thing, again, I mentioned before, Australians are not very good about gassing up their own stuff and supporting, the amazing parts of their own culture. But the very first feature film ever made came from Melbourne. It was 1906, this movie called The Story of the Kelly Gang. And it's a bit shit because, like, how many Ned Kelly stories can you watch before you're like, again, with this guy with the fucking tin on his head? But it was this rich birthplace of cinema that is so fascinating to dive into, and using the world of slashers and literary slashers to combine that with cinema and the slashers I grew up loving was an exciting, like, meshing of the two. And it's not to say, like, to be honest, not everyone's you, Gav. They're not necessarily picking up the crossover between filmic slashers and literary slashers, but that stuff is there if you get it, and if you don't, hopefully it's still just like a compelling story regtwo
Gavin's reading it
and
like,
two more
another one.
Yes, another one. Thank you. Another one. Two more things real quick before I get fully into the history. One, thank you for mentioning Outkast's Dracula's Wedding in the book, because
oh my God,
I used
such
to,
a good song.
when I was a strip club DJ, I used to play it all the time.
I bet you that song went off. I bet you it fucking, everybody would have been
it
like
worked.
on the pole. Oh my God.
And for those of you out there who are thinking of picking up the Graveyard Shift and you're like, I don't know, spooky things are not for me, Maria writes one hell of a fucking love scene as well too. There's more than one love scene in this book, but I was like reading it on the bus and I was like, oh my, like
when?
like, yeah.
I had a friend of mine send me a text. He was actually one of the technical consultants for the book because he's a radio show host, and him and his husband were reading it like simultaneously. They were like fighting over the same copy. Anyway, so they were racing to get to it first. And I get this message from my friend Keegan, and he's like, I don't fuck with the straights, but I just read this sex scene and I have half a chub, and girl, it is hot. And I was like,
it's
what
hot.
a compliment. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What is horny?
Yeah,
like the specifics are like whatever. Not here to yuck anyone's yum. So
yeah, this is no like J.J.R. Martin or whatever his name is from Game of Thrones, who writes like a horny 13-year-old boy. Like, these are sex scenes. It's
adults.
Great. Adults.
What again, what's one of the defining traits of slashers? Sex. And slashers are like really intermingled. It's an important piece of the genre.
Yep.
So the slasher subgenre doesn't really get going till the latter half of last century, but I do want to just touch on some things. As you mentioned, the great literary tradition. I mean, people going to watch horrific acts of goes all the way back to ancient Rome, gladiator times, and like just watching people being torn apart by lions. There's the French tradition of the Grand Guignol theater and whatnot, and all of this, when we get cinema, when we get film, you get like kind of a history of this. And so like slashers are starting, like people are laying the groundwork. It's one of the earliest is The Bat, which Louis and I saw the remake of The Bat for our Vincent Price episode, but the original Bat, where it's like literally a man in a dressed in a bat costume going around murdering people. You get Val Lewton's The Leopard Man, which is about a psycho who's like attempting to blame the deaths of sorority girls on a loose leopard instead of being just him. While all this is happening in Hollywood, you also get the rise of Krimi Pictures in Germany. I did not know about Krimi Pictures until I started doing this research for this.
Germany's Krimi films and Italy's Giallo Pics are some of the earliest examples of cinema that paired crime stories with the bloodshed that became a slasher genre staple. Many of the Krimi films, short for criminal film or crime film of the late 50s and 60s, are based on the works of British novelist Edgar Wallace, and like modern slasher films, often focused on elusive masked villains. In fact, in these films, the bad guys are so important that they often appear in the movie's titles, as with 1959's Face of the Frog and 1967's Creature with a Blue Hand.
And what's interesting is the Italians see this, and it starts inspiring Giallo. Giallo are these cheap paperback fiction horror novels. Giallo's the Italian word for yellow, or gialli, and the covers were often yellow, and then people make movies out of them. And that's why you see like in some of the early Gialli, like What Happened to Solange is a German-Italian co-production, because they're like taking these ideas of these German crime pictures and they're making them even more brutal, but also, as Maria said, fashionable. Like this is the thing about Giallo pictures is they're very much like slashers, except everyone's wearing Dior.
Hot.
And yeah, exactly. They're more often than not like not teenagers. They are full adults and they are just on the catwalk all the time. I don't want to get too far into Krimi or Giallo because I think both of those things could be their own episode. And also, I didn't get a chance to watch any Krimi pictures, but I certainly want to now. But I mean, really, the big year for slashers in America is 1960. 1960, both Peeping Tom comes out and Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Michael Powell's Peeping Tom is released in England. Michael Powell is very famous for making these very gorgeous, like The Red Shoes and Tales of Hoffman. They were very theatrical, very candy colored, very bright Technicolor. And what's interesting about Peeping Tom is it's like that, except it's about a man who kills women. And a lot of it is taken from his first person perspective, and you get to know him, and he has childhood trauma. And so it's like laying these pieces of groundwork for future slashers. However, it screens for critics, and critics hate it. They're like, it's disgusting, it's terrible. And it basically destroys Michael Powell's career. Alfred Hitchcock, 2 months later, saw what happened with Peeping Tom and is like, my new movie's coming out. I am not letting critics see it beforehand. Audiences will see Psycho for the first time without critical reaction. And it's a huge success.
I saw both of these movies. Thank you. And to be like, I maybe had seen some of Psycho. I hadn't seen all of it. Certainly hadn't seen Peeping Tom. And I was like, I thought they were both very good. I just can't imagine like why, like what is the big difference between the two of them? I mean, obviously Peeping Tom is more interested in talking about, the idea of like examining, looking, like there's a lot of media happening in that movie and like being in front of the camera and vanity and like how that, is Psycho. Also, I think we have to talk about like what the fuck does like what counts as a slasher? Psycho, I think, is obviously there, but like it's very, I don't know. Psycho specifically is a little bit more like psychological, thrilling. It's not like there is someone out and about murdering. Like the big twist is, like the vibe.
There is somebody out and about murdering. Her name is Mrs. Bates. Of course. She's just wandering around stabbing people in showers.
Yeah,
cutting people in the stairs.
Yeah, I don't know.
And by Mrs. Bates, I mean, spoiler alert, it's Norman Bates.
It's Norman.
Cracked and...
But it's also the difference, I think, between Peeping Tom and Psycho is the difference between the filmmakers having different types of celebrities is like, I think has a lot to do with the way that filmmakers themselves, people knew their names, knew their lives, knew their faces, knew their voices in a way that now we maybe only have like a handful of A-list directors, whereas back then that was not the case. But also the star power and the added oomph and the sex appeal of Psycho, I think definitely was one of those things that elevated it. But Alfred Hitchcock, just like as much as he's like a real bit of a bastard, had an amazing understanding of how to be a showman, how to sell the film. And Psycho, as much as like not screening to critics, I think was really important into shifting the pathways, whereas Peeping Tom goes left and Psycho ends up going right, and they're not actually, to your point, Lewis, like that dissimilar, is also this idea of eventizing the experience of seeing Psycho. There were these huge like placards up at the cinemas that were like, don't spoil the ending, don't say a word, like keep it secret, like very Agatha Christie mousetrap vibes of like making the audience complicit in the experience for other people in a way that really engaged them. Some would say Psycho was the original Barbenheimer hysteria. Not I, but some. No, but the experience of like everybody was talking about it and not talking about it and talking about it was simultaneously the power of that film.
Louis, if you want a more strict definition for your slashers,
Please.
Pace Magazine's definition notes that slasher villains are human beings or were human beings at some point. Slasher villains are human killers whose actions are objectively evil because they're meant to be bound by human morality. That's the part of the fear genre that it's meant to prey upon, the idea that the killers walk among us.
Horror movies before that, the metaphors had gotten old. If you take, for example, the Wolfman sort of the metaphor, that's about fear of one's own bestiality, or the 50s science fiction movies, which were about the fear of science and how that could get out of control. I think in the 80s, there was a new perception that the enemy was ourselves, that the worst possible enemy was another human who had gone crazy and whose motive was not rational, who could just come out of the blue and kill you.
You're also getting exploitation films. And we talked a lot about exploitation films in our Pam Grier episode. And exploitation films exist basically to show you, quote unquote, show you the things that you couldn't see in mainstream cinema. You know, the things that are outside the lines, which ran the gamut of anywhere from women's lib to disgusting slaughter.
One and the same.
Of course. And you're also seeing the rise of big genre filmmakers. You get Wes Craven's The Hills Have Eyes in 1977. You get the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974, which is doesn't fully, is a slasher movie, right? But doesn't launch the genre in the way that Black Christmas will. And I guess that's where I was kind of getting us to, is you get Bob Clark's Black Christmas in 1974, the same year, and this really sort of lays the groundwork for the American slasher, which is funny because it's Canadian. But what it does is, this is a movie that preys upon the old urban legend of the person calling from inside the house. But the great thing that Black Christmas does is presents us with a villain who is basically unknowable. Black Christmas doesn't wrap itself up with any easy answers. It's basically just the scary danger is out there. And this sort of prevalent fear is what ends up, helping to launch this. The next big thing in the lineage is Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween, 1978, which basically comes about because John Carpenter has a conversation with Bob Clark, and he's like, what would you do in a sequel to Black Christmas? And Bob Clark's like, oh, I'm not doing that, but if I did. And John Carpenter's like, cool, here's my movie.
There's so many of girlies in the dorm, or girlies in the house, and I was like, I liked majority of them. I think, again,
no, but you're not wrong.
They kind of run
that was a real trend because of pop culturally in crime. There was Ted Bundy had just escaped from prison and killed a bunch of sorority sisters. Richard Speck had just broken into a nurse sorority house and killed a bunch of women. It felt like the odds of you getting killed by a random psycho who comes literally out of the fucking blue and murders you and your 11 friends felt very prevalent in a way that it's not necessarily prevalent in 2023. And then that bleeds into all of the sort of, not all of that, but a lot of the horror movies from that era then all start to be about there's fucking someone inside the house and this person is coming to get you.
That is, also a product of our media at the time, because media is becoming a much more people are watching the news, the nightly news, and there's constantly and as somebody who used to work in the news, you have to fill up an hour or whatever, 24 hours sometimes, depending. And so any story of these people were injured, there was this person, they get put out there, and the people watching it at home get scared, and they start relying on this news more and more. And so that pays off in the fictional realm as well.
Right. And Black Christmas, they never find him in the house, right?
No. That's what's great about it, is
he's
the unknowable.
I kind of actually really like this subgenre of like girlies in the house and like things have gone awry, and that still goes on today. Like I think Bodies Bodies is like a really good version of this. I actually quite like that, especially because like you just get all these girlies with all those personalities, and like in Black Christmas they are girls who are not afraid to tell you what they are up to.
Hello? Hello? Who is this?
Please stop.
And you get that when it comes to like the 90s slasher resurgence too. If like you think of the finale of Scream is a bunch of girlies in a house. Girlies and guys and gays. Stu is like not canon gay, but like we know, you know.
We know. Wink.
We
Matthew
know
Lillard's all
those
but
sweaters
confirmed.
and that obsession with Billy. Like, come on, you know he is us. But
when he tells Billy he's gone too deep, we know. We know.
We know. Oh my God, such a great subtext there. But like the slashers always ending up their finale at like a big house party, or a house party being one of the staple sort of big set pieces of the genre. And all the Scream movies, that's the case, but also Urban Legend, similar vibe. There's Somebody Inside Your House from 2021. There's starts to be this trend where it's like they're always, not always, but there is usually a moment where there's somebody's winking back to that origin of a bunch of people inside a house, which I love because it's fun, it's self-contained, but it's also had this like the way it was explained to me once by Lee Winnell, who this was on the set of Invisible Man. He was saying to me that part of the reason what's so scary about, or like for him, the idea of how that movie was constructed, what scared him was this idea that the scariest thing happens inside your home, or happens like in your bedroom, the place where you're supposed to feel safest. And that is a thing that slashers are constantly tackling and really like confronting head on, is this subversion
Invasion.
of safety. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I watched When a Stranger Calls, and I was like,
Banger.
which I love, which I think is great, but I was like, is that a slasher? He's terrorizing this one woman, and he's not like killing a bunch of people.
No, that
and then
counts.
And I immediately, no, it counts.
When a Stranger Calls, though, I will say, like, you're on the money, honey, because it's also like the longer that plot unravels, it's actually that person has come from elsewhere. You know what I mean? Like, it's like this isn't the very first time they've attacked this particular person. But When a Stranger Calls, I don't know if you saw the Netflix film Hush by Mike Flanagan, who's obviously, but Hush is very like When a Stranger Calls, but the main character is deaf. And so this killer has killed the neighbors, but there's only really two of them. And he's only concerned with terrorizing this one woman. But it's like, it's for all intents and purposes, it's very much the mechanics of When a Stranger Calls, in a way that I'm like, what a fun for murder, but like what a fun update of a classic, you know? Because the When a Stranger Calls remake was like not great.
I can come in anytime I want. And I can get you anytime I want. But I'm not going to. Not until it's time. When you wish you're dead, that's when I'll come inside. Do you understand me? Nod your head if you understand me. Good. Then we can have some fun.
But yeah, so I guess there's, even though many times it's lots of murder, sometimes it's just a little bit of murder.
And if you're doing your job right, like one murder can feel just as impactful, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's harder, but like it can be done if you're constructing that story well.
Totally.
We've discussed the making of Halloween ad nauseum. We did a Jamie Lee Curtis episode. We did a John Carpenter episode. But needless to say, like, Halloween's done on the cheap. It was being produced by Syrian-American producer Mustafa Akkad, and it was co-produced by Deborah Hill, R.I.P. And, you know, I don't really know how much more to say about Halloween, but it just lays the groundwork. Laurie Strode is sort of, I mean, there's even a reference to Laurie Strode in your book, Maria. Like, Laurie Strode is the ultimate final girl, and what makes her so great is Jamie Lee Curtis just feels so real in that role. Like, and you may watch it now and may be like, I don't know if she's really a teenager, but the way she's acting, like it feels very real. And you also feel the fear. And on the reverse side of that, like Michael Myers being this unknowable killer, like even though you know who he is, you know he's like quote unquote a person, but you have like Dr. Loomis constantly running around being like, he's evil, he has the black eyes, and he's just this blank, expressionless, like seemingly unstoppable, but also very human antagonist. And from there, like once that gets popular, you start getting other things. The Toolbox Murders came out, which was a kind of a Texas Chainsaw Massacre riff. You get The Funhouse, which actually is not a movie I particularly like. I think it's a little mean-spirited, but I know that sounds crazy from like a slasher perspective.
No, that doesn't sound crazy at all. I think you can feel it. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because we're viewers that are stereotypically othered, but like, I think anybody who's ever been othered, if you're watching a slasher, you can feel the ones that have a mean spirit.
Yeah. I think also it's important to, you're Australian, but I'm sure there was reverberations of this. Ronald Reagan begins his presidency in 1980, and like the U.S. turns way back towards conservatism. And because of that, I think there was this idea. I mean, nothing happens right away ever in time, but I think there was this idea of like pushing against it and being rebellious. And also movie producers are seeing that these movies are making money. So that's when you get 1980s Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th starts a massively long running slasher series. First film, Pamela Voorhees, Jason Mom is the villain. That's not a spoiler. If you've seen Scream, you know that. And the next 9 films plus versus Jason plus a remake. Jason is the main villain, and he's famous for wearing his hockey mask, which he gets in the 3rd movie, the 3D film.
I had no idea about any of this. I watched the first one and I was like, Jason is not here.
The phone rang and my agent said, how would you like to do a movie? I said, great, that'll pay for the car that I want to buy. And he said, well, now there's just one other thing I have to tell you. He said, it's a horror film. And I said, oh, no. So the script came and I read it and I said, what a piece of...
What monster could have done this?
And I said, oh, nobody is ever going to see this. It will come and it will go, and I'll have my Scirocco.
I focused on this era, like I said, and I saw Alice Sweet Alice, which I was like,
yeah,
my goodness, the children.
It does have a rare child death, which most of the time child death is off limits in slashers.
They're just
it's like a step too far.
Yeah, like very, very shocking, for sure. I also saw The Prowler, which feels very Reagan shit, because it's like he was off at war, and he's back, and his girlie didn't wait for him, which just feels like aggressively conservative type stuff.
Alice Sweet Alice, and then The Prowler, though, and I was thinking about these too. I think because of the like influence of exploitation on the slasher genre, you're getting subjects that perhaps you don't normally get to discuss in a big budget mainstream film. Alice Sweet Alice is, for all intents and purposes, a very anti-Catholic movie.
Yeah.
It's a movie about how religion fucks you up. And The Prowler is a movie about PTSD in a time in which we were not talking about PTSD at all. That like going to war is gonna fuck you up when you see a lot of your friends exploded. You see their insides on the outside. And I'm not saying every soldier comes back a murderer, but like they're trying to touch on these topics, but also exploit them.
But there was that whole era too of Halloween was being about white flight, according to Carpenter. Like that was one of his big motivations of that particular film. They were tackling those subjects where it wasn't quite safe to do so in the mainstream cinema. It was being done in genres like slashers and exploitation action movies.
Yeah, it also just feels like there's consequences for bad behavior, consequences for being, right or wrong, like consequences for being promiscuous, but also I guess keep saying like fucking bullies, they're gonna die. You motherfuckers. And in a lot of movies it's
don't be a bully.
Yeah, don't be a bully in a lot of ways. And sometimes the bully is the Catholic Church. There's just so many, and that Alice really wants you to believe that fucking child is a murderer. They said because she's not nice. She doesn't like going to church or whatever. And they're like, yeah, she's a killer. It's crazy. But who is it a Tiny Brooke Shields in that movie?
Yeah, it's like her first or second movie. Yeah. These movies were not just being called out for, and I don't know how right or wrong these were, because a lot of these are ones I have not seen because I'm not solely composed of time. But, Gordon Willis's Windows was protested because of its equating homosexuality with psychosis. Mm-hmm. And New Year's Evil, Don't Go in the House, Don't Answer the Phone were all low budget films that were called out for misogyny, because basically they were like, well, only women will suffer, like women will suffer exclusively. And so like I don't want to make it sound like slashers were this liberal bastion of forward thinking, but like just know that there was space to talk about some of these things, just as there was space for them to get it wrong.
Right. Well, a lot of these girlies in the house movies that I really like, I'm like, oh, we are lingering in the shower. We are, there's a lot.
Well, that is absolutely the Roger Corman aesthetic, where Roger Corman was like, not to say that he did slashers or anything, but like, he was always like, you can put whatever liberal message you want in the film, and I want you to, as long as there's like some scenes of somebody getting stabbed and some boobs, like, and that's.
But it's also the thing of like who's making these movies. They're being written by men, they're being directed by men, and they're largely being seen by both, which I always find so fascinating, because the breakdown in demographics for slashers is not like 50-50, but it's like 60% men, 40% women, and that has pretty much always been that way. But it's why something like Deborah Hill, RIP to a real one, and Mustafa, who also passed away. But there's a reason I think Halloween in part stands out a little bit more compared to the other slashers of that time period, is like Deborah Hill wasn't fucking chilling in a trailer, like smoking a durry and having a chill time. She was actively working and actively making sure that there were narratives being pushed through in the script. Okay, does Halloween 1978 hold up to today's standards of like gender dynamics and racial dynamics? Fucking no. But you can't, I don't think, necessarily judge a film that was made in that specific time to a standard that we have now, because they're different things. And so even you look at slashers today, and with the exception of like American Psycho, which again, that comes into that territory of like, does that function of a slasher? I would maybe lean more towards that being like a psychological thriller, but there just aren't that many made by women. Still, there are quite a few now that are written by women, but even somebody like Christopher Landon, like the reason I think his films pop and the reason they're exciting and interesting, and Happy Death Day and Freaky, and why I'm so excited about him coming on board to do Scream, is just like, it's a different voice. It's the queerification of a classic subgenre, and that makes a difference. It changes the game in a way that, people always talk about representation being like a hand-holding exercise. But I'm like, actually, do you want your stories to evolve? Do you want your stories to be interesting and better? Like something like The Blackening, exciting. That doesn't get made by white people. Like, it's made by black people. We can't all die first, funny, objectively a great tagline.
Yeah.
All right, Maniac, let's do it. let's get it out on the floor.
Well, is Maniac your 1 star? I'm so curious.
No. I think Maniac, I was like, oh, we are, number one, not only knowing who the killer is, but we are hanging out. We are following her around. And on top of that, I was like, oh, like a lot of these movies, end up being like, oh, this person is crazy and crazy people murder. And that's like a really fucking horrible, like reductive thing.
Yeah.
This movie, though, is like, he is very clearly mentally unwell. And this movie, to me, was like, they're not afraid to be like, he has no resources. No one is helping this man who has fallen through the cracks. And clearly he is seeing visions and things that are haunting him that happened when he was a child. And the movie, I think the ending is just so great and really decides to like fucking go there and like kind of gets into like the supernatural of it all. Like, and not, it's not just like, oh, here's a crazy man and he killed women. It's like, well, let's really get into why. And I don't know, it really just turns the entire genre for me on its head. I was kind of flabber. I mean, and especially because it is brutal. Like I was like, oh, these fucking women are like, is he scalping them? Is that what he does?
Yeah, he was scalping them and then taking their scalpels and putting them on mannequins.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a remake that Elijah Wood plays the F-titled maniac that they toned down the scalping, but it is just as brutal as the original. Like it is really, really tough. A tough hang, as some would say.
I was shocked that because I do have such a soft spot for the original Maniac that I liked the remake.
I was feeling bad. I was like, oh, this man needs help. Like, and I felt like this movie is also making an indictment to like mental health care. Like, and clearly
you get to talk about the things that you can't talk about.
and clearly though, he is doing horrendous things. Like it is, I cannot stress enough. I was like, oh my God. But also, like, how often do we see where these killers live and where they go home after, these things happen? And so I was just so shocked. Like, this is not too far down the line of the genre, and they're already subverting it in really interesting, cool ways. So, yeah, I liked Maniac quite a lot.
You can lock your doors, but you can't lock the madman out of your mind.
1981, you get My Bloody Valentine, which was an attempt to create another long-running slasher genre. It sort of fails in that aspect, but people love this movie. But it was also like one of the first really ripped to shreds by the MPA in America. Like it was very heavily edited. The death scenes were cut in a way to, well, you can find the unrated now on any DVD. And I just want to name a couple also from 1981. Final Exam, Bloody Birthday, Hell Night, Don't Go Into the Woods Alone, Wes Craven's Deadly Blessings, which I have seen before, Graduation Day, and Hell Night. You get the original Prom Night, another Jamie Lee Curtis vehicle,
yes.
Not nowhere near as good as Halloween. House on Sorority Row, which we talked about. Would you like to talk about that more? I like how ridiculous House on Sorority Row. Like the in a way it has a very similar setup to I Know What You Did Last Summer, but with less repentful characters.
Sorority Row is essentially what Pretty Little Liars is. Like there's a whole generation of people who've never watched Sorority Row and probably never will.
Oh, that's
but
funny.
What they will have seen is Pretty Little Liars, and like linking the two things and linking that sort of the subgenres that exist within and sort of speak to each other textually and subtextually is really interesting. But that as like slashers, by the end of the 80s, slashers are for all intents and purposes dead until 1996. And it's very funny, well, not funny, but very interesting that it's like they get more and more insane. They get crazier and crazier and crazier. And then genre explodes with things like Silence of the Lambs and the original Candyman as these like elevated, well, they didn't use that term then, but like essentially elevated horror movies. And it feels like a direct reaction to just how fucking ridiculous horror and slashers were getting towards like the latter end of that decade.
It's not as prevalent between 84 and 94. That's where it really moves into direct to video. And so like the big ones that sort of hit are, Paramount really wants to phase out their Friday the 13th movies. So they do Friday the 13th, the final chapter, which is part 4. As I mentioned, there's 10 of these, but that was the one that was going to kill off Jason. Also in 1984, you get Nightmare on Elm Street, the original Nightmare on Elm Street. And it re-sparks briefly, however briefly, but it is we've mentioned before, it's the house that it builds New Line Cinema. It's their big hit for New Line Cinema in a way that they'd never had before. It's the house that Freddy built. I think everybody knows the plot of Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger is a child murderer, heavily implied molester. Which is
so really fascinating because they bury that as a bait and switch too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the mystery of like, is he though? And then no, he fucking is. But like, just this whole idea of like, can your parents be trusted? Like, none of the parents believe the kids, and it's like, I don't know, Nightmare on Elm Street, Hellraiser, as it's starting to get into Child's Play, even as it's starting to get into that area of like higher concept genre conceits, is very, very fun.
That's just not reality, Nancy.
It's real, Mama. Feel it.
Give me that damn thing.
It even has his name written in it. Fred Krueger, Mom. Fred Krueger. Do you know who that is, Mother? Because if you do, you better tell me, because he's after me now.
Nancy, trust your mother for once, please. You'll feel better when you get some sleep.
I had never, I think, seen the entirety of either Nightmare on Elm Street or Child's Play. Especially Child's Play, I was like, there is some African kooky bookiness.
It's really unfortunate because they wrote themselves into a hole with that, and it still exists on the Chucky TV show. And every time they bring up, and like literally, I just watched the latest episode, and they were still talking about voodoo, and I was like, we gotta find a way out of voodoo.
The Child's Play remake with Aubrey Plaza, I thought was great, and they don't need any of that.
I did not. Oh, funny.
They didn't use any of the like voodoo nonsense.
No.
It's just like, computers are bad, which I quite liked.
Fair.
So Silent Night, Deadly Night, 1984, and ends up being kind of a sticking point for the genre because it's the first time people truly, truly turn out to protest in a large way, because essentially the Catholic League was like, how dare you do this to Christmas? Like, this is a holiday for children, even though there had already been Christmas horror movies. I mean, Christmas Evil is one of my favorites. Like, but
is this the era of like Satanic Panic vibes?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so like people very upset about this, and like Silent Night, Deadly Night's not great. I mean, you want camp, watch the second one, but the first one is fine. But yes. And then you get things like the, Sleepaway Camp, which is, as Maria said, kind of like there's like B-list movies. This is kind of a C-list movie. It maybe was even direct to video here. I'm not positive on that.
It was direct to video here for sure. It was banned for a while. Sleepaway. A lot of those, like Australia, had like a lot of issues with censorship and things like that during the Ozploitation era, which is so interesting. And I also think that's why Australia has a lot of stuff as it pertains to cultural cringe, and why we're like genre averse. Even though that's like what audiences want. But Sleepaway Camp was the one that it was like, it was that and Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. They're banned. It's like you had to have you had to know somebody who knew somebody who could get it in. And we have all these companies now that have bubbled up that all got their, fucking roots in the business in the 80s by essentially being a pathway for getting in illegal DVDs,
Wow.
Like things
that's
like
funny.
Yeah, so like Nail Gun Massacre, which was a film right around this era, that was like, and also very bad, wouldn't recommend, but stuff like that would get smuggled into Australia, and Sleepaway Camp was like the title that everybody wanted.
Sleepaway Camp, and also The Burning, which came out in 1981.
Yes.
There's a rich culture of camp slashers from Friday the 13th and all that.
And by camp you mean like going to the woods, pitching a tent.
Going into the woods, pitching a tent, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't watch The Burning for a long while because I heard it was so gory, and then I watched it and I was like, it's kind of a slay. Sleepaway Camp, also I would say campy, specifically the aunt who is like sending the kiddies off. Maybe the most shocking movie I saw, or the most like gagged I was watching any of these movies. Not only because of the reveal of the killer, but like the very, very late game, like sexual politics of this movie.
Yes.
I immediately was like, I need to Google what the girlies think of this movie. And it seems to be still so, like you can't pin this movie down.
It's very polarizing.
Yeah, you can't pin this movie down. There are people who think it is, transphobic. There are people who think it's, great and not at all. And I think there are people from within the community that, think it is, really good representation. There are people who think it's horrible representation. But again, I think
then there were people who were literally dressed as the characters at New York Comic Con just a few weekends ago. Like the way this film has stayed in the culture is insane.
Yeah, and the ending is so shocking because it gives you no time to decompress. The reveal happens, the crazy face is made, and it's like, boom, credits. And it's like, what has happened?
Angela, are you all right?
Angela, are you okay? Angela, can you hear me?
Enjoy living with us so much. Yes, I know you are. As a welcome home present, I bought you such wonderful new clothes. I just hope that Richard doesn't get jealous that I didn't get him anything. But then he is such a dear. I'm sure that he won't mind. You see, I've always wanted a little girl.
I had no concept at that age. What? I was playing what? No one really told me. I went and saw it and went, whoa.
Beyond the shocking nature of the movie, I quite like, the idea of young adults going to a camp. It's about growing up. It's adolescence. You're figuring yourself out. You're you're figuring out your sexuality. You're talking to girls, talking to boys, having to stand up to the bully. There is so much going on internally. I think it is just a really ripe space for, there's already baked in anxiety. We also haven't talked about a lot of these movies. The structure is the cold open is a bad thing happens, a murder happens, and then it's 10 years later, there's an activation of anniversary, and the burning it does that. Your book, Maria, with the cold open of I was oh my god, there Scream famously,
Scream, I was just gonna say Scream, I think is because where Scream sits at the sort of start of maybe is this something is kind of Scream's vibe, but Wes Craven's understanding of all slashes kickstart after some other terrible event. So it being right on the anniversary of Maureen Prescott's rape and murder is fascinating. That when I watched Scream for the first time, I didn't understand that as a genre device. And now once you're deep into the weeds, you're oh, okay, this is actually something that's quite pivotal and important. I know what you did last summer, Urban Legend, same deal.
Yep.
I do also just want to give a shout out to Pieces, which is an 80s horror film that's actually a Puerto Rican production that was filmed in Spain and Boston and starts. I know this is why I love slashers, because it's what? And that movie is famous for a line delivery in which a woman is
while we were out here fumbling with that music, the lousy bastard was in there killing her! Bastard! Bastard! Bastard!
As we were mentioning, end of 80s comes around. There's all these long running series. They're coming to an end. And why are they coming to an end? Because the box office receipts aren't there. And then 1994's Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which isn't a massive hit, but it starts a rumble. It's the first mainstream self-reflexive slasher, and sort of lays the groundwork for something like Scream, where it's but instead it's the actors from Nightmare on Elm Street being in a Nightmare on Elm Street film.
It feels very much I know I already used this phrase, but that whole idea of I knew Nightmare had to walk so Scream could run. All of the kinks that he's trying to figure out get figured out by the time he gets to Scream, and you can still see his working on the paper in New Nightmare.
And like you mentioned, because of the Silence of the Lambs in 91, really giving that quote unquote elevated horror, and then coming off the back of New Nightmare, 1996's Scream is here. And I think everybody knows at this point what Scream is. It's a slasher movie about a young girl who her and her friends are being taunted by a mysterious phone caller who shows up wearing a ghost mask and stabs them to death. And there's the reasons for it, as we've previously mentioned. But yeah, but it's also because, like you said, the cast is amazing. The dialogue is so sharp. Some of that dialogue is still so sharp. I mean, just like, and like even the like little fun moments when they're just playing around with each other, where he's like, I said live her alone. Live her alone.
I can't get over the fact of like, your dad died last year, get over it. When are you gonna move on?
It's not even that, like, okay, it's not just the like someone died, it's that her mother was raped, murdered. She's a key linchpin witness in the trial of a nation that sends a man to jail. And like, there's a book about it already. Like, it is nuts, a nuts scenario for a kid to go through. And like, she's so seemingly normal. And he's like, yeah, babe, like my parents divorced too. You just got to get over it. Kind of like finger fuck you under your 90. And it's like, Jesus, crazy.
Gnarly.
So hectic.
I know, it's been a year.
Tomorrow. 1 year tomorrow.
I know, I think it's time you got over that. I mean, when my mom left my dad, I accepted it. It's the way it is. She's not coming back.
Your parents split up. This is not the same thing. Your mom left town. She's not lying in a coffin somewhere.
Okay, I'm sorry. It's a bad analogy. But it's just that I want my girlfriend back.
So I Know What You Did Last Summer comes out in 97. Scream 2 also comes out in 97. I saw both of those in the theaters, which means adults had to go with me to get me in to them.
Bananas. I think this, again, Scream being as good as it is one of the things that gets often overlooked about it is how fucking good Scream 2 is and how quickly it came after the original Scream. And it's like, Scream was amazing. I think Scream is, you know, if I had to do my definitive rankings of Scream, it's like Scream and Scream 2, and then everything else like in, you know, various orders from there. But Scream had the benefit of being a surprise, of being unexpected, of not having any weight on it, right? And so it was this big hit and it was amazing and blah, blah, blah. Scream 2 has the harder task of being accelerated through development, accelerated through production, and having to grapple with not only the huge expectations, but the significant box office that was still happening. Scream was still VHSing, doing its thing as Scream 2 came out. And that sequel is genuinely so good, so scary, has lots of inventive set pieces, really plays with the rules of sequels and sequeldom, but then also has some great, like the Randy death scene, for instance, that happens during the day. It's very hard to do a horror movie that's scary in daylight hours, and not for one moment does I feel Wes Craven or Kevin Williamson like let their foot up off the gas. Like they are just absolutely fucking cooking. And the cast is too. I don't know if a woman has ever looked hotter in my life than Neve Campbell looks in that movie. And like they got Jerry O'Connell just at the right moment, you know, like there's just a few beats that are just like really fucking great. And Kevin Williamson wrote I Know What You Did Last Summer too. And so you have that like that similar sort of like zip that he had with Dawson's Creek. He really was like, he was the teen girly at the moment because he was doing all the teen stuff. But there's just something about, I Know What You Did Last Summer is fun, but it is much more of a melodrama than Scream, which is always consistently funny, but also the world is just so interesting because it does that progressing thing of we start in Woodsboro, which is small, and then we move to a college campus. And I Know What You Did Last Summer is like, we're a coastal town. And then it's like, and we're a coastal island. It's like, okay, we get it. There's always got to be wet stuff. I understand the premise.
It's funny. And I think this goes back to something Louis and I were talking about before, which I also think with the thing that Kevin Williamson does so well, and I think it truly reverberates into slashers going forward, is he creates characters that are really likable. And I think one of the problems is, especially with the slasher as a franchise, is like you kind of have to root for the characters' deaths. And as the franchises go on, it starts to focus more and more on the killers themselves and less on the victims. And so then you're really rooting for like Freddy to pop up and kill people in an inventive way instead of like wanting these people to make it out of the film and rooting for them. And I think Kevin Williamson does a really good job. I remember when Randy died in Scream 2 and like the backlash that occurred to that. But I think there's a power in killing those characters, and it's certainly something that the newer Scream movies could learn, because there's characters that should be fucking dead. And
it's also the struggle that the Scream franchise had with, after they killed Randy, finding a Randy substitute, like finding somebody who was again, like the problem with the lightning in the bottle cast is like, you leave the original Scream movie, there's like 3-4 people who survive out of a cast of like 12, right? They actually kill the characters off. And for the audience to believe that your world is compelling and authentic and has stakes, you have to kill characters. It's hard to see your favorites get got, but at the same time, fucking pick up a rom-com then, you know what I mean? Or like pick up a different genre. These are the tenets that make it what it is.
This is the era when like I was watching the Screams. I have seen at least the first 3 Screams. I saw both I Know What You Did Last Summers, but this was, and I realized I was like, I hate this actually. Why? This is because they are so scary. Like, I think, people on Twitter now are like, oh, LOL, I'm going to go see the Scream. It's so fun, this and that. And I'm like, yes, but when you're like in middle school watching this, it is so frightening. And I remember all my like straight bro friends were like, pussy, like, and I'm like, yeah, yes, correct. It is actually, like, I mean, just like really not just thrilling, but like horrifying, and watching it back now as an adult, and especially watching like the 80s stuff, it's like, oh, silly, it is fun, but the reality of Scream, and I Know What You Did Last Summer, it is so close. To me at the time, it has felt very close to like,
and this is where the Louis and I never fully meet, which is that people like to get scared. That's why these movies work, and that's why they exist. Yeah, I was gonna say, Louis, it's okay. My boyfriend's the same way. Like, he's like, no, I don't like being scared. But
could never be me.
I love that little rush of being like, huh, like, oh yeah. But I also, we've seen kind of scary movies together, Louis, and my reaction is laughing.
Oh my God, we watched it together. I was inside the seat and you were laughing. I was like, I'm gonna kill Kevin.
But yeah, I mean, and so because of these new age slashers, it revitalizes the older age slashers. Wow, bleh. You get legacy sequels like Halloween H2O 20 years later, the following sequel to that, Halloween Resurrection, Jason X, Freddy vs. Jason, and 2003. You get movies that play with the genre but aren't exactly slashers. Things like Final Destination, where there is no killer but the killer is death.
Yeah,
or like as the aforementioned American Psycho, where it's like, is this a slasher? Is this not a slasher? Like, it's got the hallmarks, but it's doing something very different. And then you get kind of certainly a return to low budge. I mean, the low budge was always there, but like people are paying more attention to them, like Wrong Turn, which like wasn't a huge box office success. It got it did 2.5 million tickets, but because of that was enough to launch several straight to video sequels.
We watched Wrong Turn, and my God, horrifying. And so scary.
Like these movies, so you're like, that's okay, whatever. And then you stop paying attention. And outside of stuff like Final Destination and Saw, what both of those have in common is that there's 86 entries in the franchise, right? But then like you're at Wrong Turn like 82 or whatever, and you're like, what?
Right.
How many turns are there? Like shit. Like you blink for a second, and then there's just like there's 6 Lost Boys. You know what I mean? Like it's really wild to think that.
Yeah, and there's like all these offshoots that occur in other countries. There's the New French Extremity, which, by the way, Louis, if you think like slasher, like New French Extremity is my line, where I'm like, no thanks.
Don't get him into Martyrs. Martyrs is not a fun
don't
time.
Get him. Exactly. I was like, I don't need to see this. I'm fine. But yeah, and then kind of what happens because these things are making money is you move into remakes and reboot eras. Nightmare on Elm Street gets a remake. Friday the 13th gets a remake. You get even further legacy sequels for the Halloween films. Halloween Ends, and or Halloween Still Happening, and Halloween It Was Yesterday,
Kills,
and
whatever.
The Kills. Thank you. That's the one in the middle. Which I don't know how anybody feels about the Halloween remakes. I was not the biggest fan, but they lost me immediately. Yeah, I love the attempt at what they did with Laurie Strode, but I think the most brilliant thing that they did is very early on in the first one, there's the two podcasters that go and talk to her, and they're like,
I think you're about to have the same issue as I do, because Lewis
Really?
mentioned it earlier as well. No, you continue with your beat, and then I'll just come in as a call and response.
Well, they're basically like, you know, like, this thing happened to you all the years ago, like, you know, and you got divorced, blah, blah. And she's like, this man killed like 4 of my friends, and I've had like a couple bad marriages, and I'm the like, why aren't you like, why do you care about what's going on in his brain and not the victims? And I was like, such a salient point. This is my problem with true crime, is so much of it focuses on the perpetrator and not the victims and what's happened since then. And then the movie immediately jettisons it. It's like, cool, we got the idea out. Great. We don't need to talk about it anymore.
Well, so my beef was the whole thing where you were talking was about like what makes something a slasher, and if you don't kill that many people, is it even a slasher? And I'm like, yes, I think all you have to do is be trying to kill one for it to qualify. But, you know, it doesn't always have to be a masked serial killer. It can just be like somebody in pursuit of another person, I think is like one of the defining traits of. But in the Halloween reboots, or re-reboots, I should say, because obviously there was the Rob Zombie ones before that, but it really fucking jerked my gherkin when they were like, okay, so nothing except the first Halloween counts, okay? And you're like, okay, fine, yep, that's cool. If that's what you want to do, all good in the hood. And then they have all of this like hysteria and weight and podcasting and obsession with Michael Myers, the killer, except per the events of the first film, he really only killed like 4 people, which to me is like, that's a bad day. Anybody could kill 4 people if your day goes wrong. And so it was like they wanted all of the weight and expectation that the audience had of Michael Myers that they get from knowing films 1 to 8 exist or whatever, but without any of that. And I was like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. He either killed 4 people or he killed 40, and all those other events count. And I just thought that Halloween H2O did a much better job earlier and first of trying to do the same things that the new 3 Halloween movies were trying to do about, you know, Jamie Lee Curtis gif here, trauma, women's trauma. It's about trauma.
Trauma. And you do occasionally get like things that are interested in playing with the genre. I think Your Next is a great subversion of the slasher genre, where essentially like the lead girlie becomes the killer. Like,
I have never rooted so hard for a final girl in my life. I was like, I love her. Also, again,
that was I saw that in the theater. It was so good. And also, what a fun time.
Also, like in this modern era with like trying to subvert, I love and Your Next and Ready or Not also plays with this, is like straight life marriage is a fucking trap and a horror story. Like and Your Next, I thought did that so well, because this motherfucker, I would, that movie is a very like kind of Russian doll of like who you think is the actual big bad, and when you finally get to like, you know, the actual guy, I was like, straight people are sick in the head, and like this girlie is a badass bitch who does not need that fucking guy. Yeah, Your Next, tons of fun.
This wasn't a random attack, Felix. Okay. Yeah. You understand what I'm saying? Our families speak.
Australian survivalist.
Yeah. I also really like 2 others that sort of play Tucker and Dale versus Evil, which I've not seen since it came out, but I remember it being just a fun time.
Yeah.
And The Final Girls, which I don't know if you saw that, Maria, because I know that you've seen Totally Killer.
Of course I did. Of course I did.
I think that's what kept me from really loving Totally Killer, because I did feel like They are different, but I did feel like they're so close.
They are so close, and also the Totally Killer feels very much within the formula of Happy Death Day and Freaky, of like,
Yes.
guys, we've figured this out, perky blonde at the front and center, and we have this 90-minute window, and we're in and we're out, and we have these beats and these characters, which I love. It's a comfort blanket. I always get excited when there's something like that pumping out. I'm keen, I'm interested, I'm involved. However, Final Girls is actually quite heady in the things that it's attempting to do about.
It made me cry.
Me too. About like matriarchal storytelling and like, you know, fucking you can't sleep on Thaisa Farmiga. Like she is like real little scream queen and really carries that film, but also all of the supporting cast are really fun. And the mechanics of how the time loop is working, I think were very interesting and unconventional compared to, say, a knife shoved in a fucking photo booth. As like, that's easier to explain. And that's why I sort of understand perhaps the audience of something like Totally Killer is bigger than Final Girls.
And that's the thing, like if people want to get like really literary deep film reading, because we always say when we do an episode like this, like we're never going to hit everything, like we can't be completely comprehensive. We've got 2 hours to get, but we do our best to give you like a 101. But I mean, obviously the classic Men, Women, and Chainsaws, I've brought it up on this show before. Read it, make it your Bible. Like it's got such good theory in it and beautiful work. And we didn't even talk about Candyman, and Candyman has since come back as well too. But I think that really brings us to today. You know, we're getting things now like Megan, which is, you know, kind of along the same lines of the Chucky remake.
I mentioned Bodies, 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 which is like kind of like a funny
The Blackening.
The Blackening, like the anxiety is like of these friends and social media.
The killer is the friends we hate along the way, basically.
Yes, yes. Which I thought that movie was really fun and gaggy. The Blackening is so funny. I was laughing my fucking face off. So funny, so good. And
even like, I think at the end of the month, Five Nights at Freddy's is coming out, which is, you know, based off the video game. And there's been a couple like kind of riffs on that already with the Banana Splits movies and the Nicolas Cage Willy's Wonderland, which I've heard are both very bad. But
we talked about Happy Death Day and you know that also fun. I think Ready or Not was really fun. Like she has a line, she's like, fucking rich people.
But I think that brings us to our current moment. So why don't we get into our picks? So why don't we start with our 1-star reviews to talk about maybe the slasher movies that didn't stab us too hard.
Maria, we always let our guests go first. You are our special guest of honor. So please, what is your 1-star review slasher movie?
Well, this was actually choosing a 1-star was tough because I don't love, like, if I don't like a thing, I usually am like pretty quiet about it. It's like fucking keep it moving because, you know, working in the film and TV business, it's fucking hard. It's a grind.
Yeah, and like, and listen, we're not, you know, you don't have to like tear anything apart if you don't want to.
No,
like, that's,
well,
you know,
I was just sort of trying to think like, and again, what also made it tricky is because I love this subgenre, so it's actually quite hard because I like even the things that I don't love, I don't hate in like a visceral sort of way because I'm already predispositioned to like the thing within the genre. For instance, something like Talk to Me, which is one of the big horror hits of the year, that's like a 3 out of 5 star movie for me. So far from being a 1-star, but it's like it has some great strengths and it has some great weaknesses, I think, and I'm really interested to see how that goes as a franchise. So choosing the 1-star was tough. I thought about this film. I was choosing my 1-star based on like this sort of idea that we were talking about things that were quite malicious or like slashers that sit within the genre that are malicious. And I was thinking about this Australian film called Killing Ground, which I have a real distaste for. And it was sort of positioned as like the new Wolf Creek. And I was like, okay, what? Because just horrible things happen to women, which isn't really what Wolf Creek is about at all. Wolf Creek is
not at all.
Actually quite complex treatise on Australian immigrant culture and the sort of like weaponization of larrikinism, and is very much speaking to Australia's history of racial suppression and repression. And Killing Ground was just fucking horrible stuff for horrible people's sake. But I don't know if it necessarily fits all the subcategories for slasher. So I was like, fuck it, go back to the OG. And for me, my 1 star is Halloween 2, which 1981, directed by Rick Rosenthal, not directed by John Carpenter, unlike the OG Halloween. One of the things that I like most about Halloween 2 is that it picks up literally minutes after Halloween 1, and so does the David Gordon Green Halloween 2, of which I also hated and would also give a 1 star. So I think anytime you do a Halloween 2, you're cursed for me. I just don't love it. But I love that as a conceit of like the sequel just being seconds after the original, because there's then no heavy lifting for the audience. They remember quite clearly like where things are meant to be. But the reason I really disliked Halloween 2 is I felt like it really undermined all of the traits and strengths and benefits of Laurie Strode as a final girl by essentially having her incapacitated throughout most of the movie and essentially drugged up for all intents and purposes. And there's a real nastiness towards women in the deaths that occur throughout Halloween 2 that doesn't exist there in the same way in Halloween. You could say that, Michael Myers definitely, like, he has a boner for wanting to kill, like, sexy babysitters for sure, but he kills men equally as brutally. There's, not saying he's, like, equality, but at the same time, like, he's an equal opportunity.
It is weird that he was wearing that suffragette banner the whole time. I was
Feminist
like,
icon Michael Myers.
Yeah, he really wants to get them to vote.
He said gay rights and he kept it moving. And like Michael Myers had to Vogue so the Babadook could fucking run. You know what I mean? Anyway, but in the sequel, it feels very specifically targeted and vicious towards women in a way that I didn't like. It goes through, has these really like tonally inconsistent moments of extreme gore and violence cut to sheer fucking boredom. And it's a movie that never, like, for me, of all the films in the Halloween franchise, I quite like Season of the Witch. I have a soft spot for it. I think it's interesting. I think it's ambitious. I think it's fucking weird. Of all the movies in the Halloween franchise, including the one where Busta Rhymes fucking fly kicks Michael Myers out of a window, Halloween 2 is the one that is the biggest drop off in quality for me and the biggest betrayal of, I think, what I had interpreted as being the sort of core traits of Halloween as a franchise.
I'm sorry I left you. Are you all right?
Why won't he die?
Get away from him! But he stopped breathing! No!
My 1-star review is actually pretty easy. We talked about the original of this franchise, but my 1-star review is 2009's My Bloody Valentine 3D.
Oh my god!
Which I saw in the theater. So
Same here. I was on the junket tour for that. I interviewed all the crew and cast.
2009 was like the era when like 3D was going to save cinema. This was maybe also one of the first movies I saw for this episode, and I was just like, hey boy, we are in it to win it. I think My Bloody Valentine 3D has all the things that I hate about slasher movies. It is just the most basic garbage bargain bin version of this genre, where it's like, I mean, so My Bloody Valentine, classic setup. There is a madman who killed people in a mine, and like his the iconic killer is like a miner. He's got like the mask and like his pickaxe. These kids go down to a mine for LOLs, and this miner fucking kills all but like 3 of them, and then it's like 10 years later. And now one of them is like the sheriff, and also it's like the guy who had the gay kiss in Dawson's Creek. One of the guys from Supernatural is also here.
Jensen Ackles. Yeah.
It is a very CW looking film, I would say. And yeah, so like they tackle like, is there a very like classically beautiful woman who gets mauled in a horrible way, and she's completely naked, full frontal, for no reason. Literally no reason. She's running outside butt naked. Horrible death for her. We get really horrendous like politics around mental health. Every bullshit straight white person thing that the worst of all of this genre is in this one movie. And to top it all off, there's fucking shit flying in your face because it's 3D. And like, I just cared so little about all these people. And I wish I would have seen the original because I read that people really liked it. And I honestly thought that this was going to be the original. And I was like, oh, this must be a remake. Horrendous. The vibe of that movie is just like boner. Like boner. And not in a fun, sexy way. It's just like a white, straight, horrible, society trap way. And I think that movie is a fucking trap. Luckily, like, I guess I got that out of the way. And because afterwards I was like, oh, none of these movies are as bad as that one. And honestly, like, none of the deaths in that movie are like terribly inventive or like funny or like, a lot of these movies are funny. And like this one just had all the melodrama garbage of a very bad CW movie. And the writing, it's just all around, bleh, not for me.
This certainly won't quiet the rumors about Harry Warden being back.
People can think what they want. Doesn't make it true.
The talk is out there, Sheriff. A lot of folks remember 10 years ago like it was yesterday.
Yeah, there's a lot of minor suits in this town, Martin. It's not Harry Warden. He's dead, remember?
Sheriff, you got a Valentine.
I'm going to do a little outside the box. It's been a very long time since I've like tied. And once again, I don't like shitting on things, but you know me. I love a genre mashup. Love a little comedy in my romance. Love a little action in my adventure. Love a little horror comedy every now and then. Two genres that don't work together: musical slashers. They don't. And so my 1-star review is actually a tie between 2010's Don't Go in the Woods and 2014 Stage Fright, which is one of many stage frights, by the way.
Gavin, do you not like Sweeney Todd?
So, but that's different, and that's different.
Yeah, I would say that's not a slasher per se. You know what I mean? Like, no, these.
Oh, he's slashing.
Good. I mean, yes. Does he slash? Absolutely. With a fucking blade, with his dick, for sure. He slashes vampires. Like, everyone's doing a slash, but
But Gavin, please.
2010's Don't Go Into the Woods was actually Vincent D'Onofrio, the actor's directorial debut. It's about like kind of a screamo band who decides to go into the woods to write their new album. And their lead singer, Nick, is like, everybody, no drugs, no alcohol, no phones. Like, we really need to be serious artists. And they go there, and literally within like a night, a bunch of girls show up with drugs and booze. In the midst of all of this, there are like 5-minute long, bad, like Jimmy Eat World-esque numbers throughout the movie.
Okay, I love that.
No, it's not good. You don't love this, trust me. And then also, for some reason, the girls get musical numbers, but not as the band. Like, the boys only have musical numbers confined to the band. The girls occasionally can wander the woods and sing to themselves. And suddenly, there's a mysterious man in a hat with a sledgehammer who is picking them off one by one. I think the most embarrassing is, I mean, there's a lot of embarrassing shit in there. There's a lot of, like, very light homophobia. Like, all the guys are like, oh, suck me off, oh, you're not my type. Like, I'm like, great, cool, whatever. And then there's a French character, a French woman who doesn't speak any English, and you also think that's gonna pay off, but nope, she's just there to sing like some really annoying pop punk Je t'aime means I love you song before getting hit in the head with a hammer.
Je t'aime, je t'aime, je t'aime.
On the flip side of that, Stage Fright 2014, which is a musical about a killer, the Phantom of the... He's not the Phantom of the Opera for legal reasons, I'm sure. The Opera Ghost, who is picking off kids at a theater summer camp that is run by Meatloaf.
I love that.
and one of the main girl in it, her mother is Minnie Driver in a pop-up tip spot at the very beginning, getting killed by an opera ghost, who like 10 years later.
You cannot have a film that is centered around the performing arts and Minnie Driver not pop up. Like, it is a rule.
She doesn't even get cast. She just is there. This movie's really bad. It does try and go for a more traditional musical. In fact, there's one point where they actually do the Jesus Christ Superstar riff, and I was like, lawsuit. But it's really trying to do like play with the Phantom of the Opera stuff, but also like this killer but this is one of the few I watched with Dan. We watched it on Tubi, so there were commercials, and we literally couldn't tell when it was in commercial and when it was in the movie, because the movie just looks like a commercial. COVID denier Meatloaf just doing his best around also musical theater people think kabuki and Japanese they think that the racial thing is like really funny, and so like for some reason they decide to set the Haunting of the Opera as a kabuki theater, so all the kids are in like pancake geisha makeup, and I was like, this is 2014.
I was
2014
seems a little late for some of these decisions.
Yeah, well, there's also a song at the beginning that's like, I'm gay, but not in that way.
Oh, sure.
And it's like also, come on, guys. I know what you're doing, but like,
this is right in Katy Perry's "You're So Gay and You Don't Even Like Boys" era.
Shut your fucking face! Your musicals are full of shit every single day. You people make me sick.
I think that wraps up our 1-star reviews. Why don't we get into more positive territory and talk about our 5-star reviews?
One of you guys go first, because I had such a hard time. Like, I was really truly having like a mental breakdown, being like, do I pick a 5-star classic that everyone's covered, like Scream, or do I pick a 5-star underrated that people might have missed, or do I pick a 5-star recent gem? So I was really just like having a crisis of confidence. So I need to kind of know what you guys picked, and then I feel like I can assess from there.
It's truly your playground, but I can go. I'll go first. I'll make it easy.
You go first, babe.
1978's Halloween, and I think it's so good. And like, I know that's kind of a cop out, but like it lays the it is the template for the slasher. Like, even though there's things that come before it that like kind of give it the seeds, it's the what is the stone? It's the Rosetta Stone. It just truly is. It's got everything you can need. It's got, Michael Myers, the unstoppable faceless killer, who's just pure evil, but also so relatable, who could be behind you at any moment, but also is nowhere, at the same time. It's got Laurie Strode, who's this incredibly likable main character, teenager, and she's the good one. She's the one who, like, maybe she's not paying the most attention to the kid she's babysitting with, but she's not out having sex. She's not drinking. And, she's doing all the quote unquote responsible stuff. You've got the great Sam Loomis character, which I think is a part of slashers people have a tendency to forget about, because if your killer character is so faceless, so unknowable, you need another character that essentially runs around as his hype man. Who's like, and I think all those things work so well.
You need a dick that has a face.
You need literally someone to be like, what's his name? Let me hear you say Michael Myers. Michael Myers.
What if murdering girls is good?
Have they considered moving him on any night that's not October 31?
And that's exactly why he functions so perfectly in that capacity.
The only thing that ever bothers me is their gibberish. When they start raving on and on.
You haven't anything to worry about. He hasn't spoken a word in 15 years.
Are there any special instructions?
Just try to understand what we're dealing with here. Don't underestimate it.
Don't you think we could refer to it as him?
If you say so.
But yeah, and then just the way that Carpenter shoots it. I mean, starting with the first person perspective. And I think that's one of the other things that most of the sequels get wrong. I still go to bat for part 4, but I think a lot of them get wrong is he's the shape, there's not a lot of that in the other ones. There's not a lot of like, he's just there in a place with you. Like you see him out of the corner of your eye. And I think that's so suspenseful. Also, famously, like Carpenter showed this to a bunch of people without music beforehand, a bunch of executives, and nobody wanted to buy it because they're like, it's not scary. And when he added that score, I think the score is a huge difference for it, instantly recognizable. And sure, it's full of a lot of like shocks, but like it works. It works for that reason. So yes, 1978's Halloween. Perfect slasher movie.
Very solid pick, Gavin. My pick is bonkers, bananas, and like Bring It On. The movie I love.
Is it the last Bring It On movie, which was also a slasher?
Yeah. Bring It On to Hell.
There was one. The fourth or fifth or sixth, however many there are. The last direct-to-video one was like Bring It On or Die or something like that.
That's incredible. I simply must watch. I surprisingly, I remember watching bits and bobs of Nightmare on Elm Street, and I decided to revisit, and I watched the first one, and I was like, oh my god, Freddy Krueger's kind of a little freak. Like, he's a little weirdo who, like, for no reason is like, bleh, I'm gross. Like, for no reason,
He loves a gimmick. He loves a gimmick. Freddy Krueger would have loved Halloween Horror Nights. He would have been there every year with his little posse. Like, he would have had a Loungefly backpack on, would have been there.
And then I watched the second one because I was so intrigued. And I was like, wait a minute. My 5-star review is A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge.
Nice. Yeah.
Because it is the only... Well, number one, I think first of all, when I watched the first one, I was like, the idea of... what if your dreams can kill you is such an interesting concept to me, because a lot of we're told to follow our dreams, be ambitious, be passionate, all that stuff. But this idea, like, obviously it's not the central idea, but like in the end, it's like, if you are dreaming, it like you will die, and maybe this speaks to me right now where it's like, we are such a work consumed culture, and this idea of like dreaming to like make money and all this stuff, like, dreams are supposed to be good and whatever, and obviously like they're nightmares, but like still, so that idea like hooked me. And then watching the second one, which is just miles away, from the concept. This is also a rare movie where the final girl is a boy, right. and
he's a member of the tribe,
and he, honey, he is a girly. Tyler Coates wrote for Decider. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is the gayest horror movie ever made, and she's right. Is his name? I think his name's Jamie. I could have that wrong.
Yes,
but Jamie.
No, you're right.
Jamie has moved into the house where our original final girly, battled with Freddy, and he, is like not the coolest guy. He gets pantsed, and like we get to see his cute little butt when he's playing softball.
Jesse.
Oh,
That's
Jesse.
what it is.
What I'm trying to say is this movie is hella fucking gay, and I think in such an interesting like, horror is such an interesting lens to look at, like, the process of coming out and the anxiety. Like, the anxiety here is, and this is my fucking read, the anxiety of him like being gay. There is something inside of him that he's trying to push down.
Yeah.
And it's Freddy. Freddy is like, the metaphor of his gayness is Freddy. Freddy's trying to use him to commit all these murders and horrible acts. And there's this great scene where he's like talking to his mom and dad, and no one believes him. And he's like, no, there's something inside me. I can't, like, I don't want this. I don't want this for my life. And it's so powerful. And this is not just like subtextual, like in the text, he like meets up with his like gym teacher at like an S&M club. The gym teacher like is killed in the showers, like literally scratches down his back. And meanwhile, Jesse's just like looking from the shower, like, work. The scene where like his dad makes him clean his room, and he like lip syncs for his life, literally. just this like booty popping and like, putting on his glasses. The song is so gay also. It's the way that I have literally had the same thing happen to me where he's trying to like hook up with his girlfriend and he's like, oh, I can't, and runs away. I was like, that literally has happened to me in high school. And where does he go afterwards? He goes to his bud's house. And the guy's like, yeah, she was trying to get it in and you're here wanting to sleep with me. And he's like, yeah. It's scary. It's funny. It's silly. Like all the things that I have come to realize that I like about this genre are that like it can be all these things and it doesn't have to just be like the brutality, which really like gets me like, what? And yeah, and also this, I think, is a really great queer, deconstruction of this experience. I mean, God, this is like the mid 80s, like, height of AIDS.
Early 80s.
Like,
yeah.
Jesus. Like, and so, yeah.
I guess it's mid.
But it really does make you wonder that there's always queer subtext and then it just becomes text by the end of his career and the end of his life. But Wes Craven's movies were always very gay. And he was not a gay man, but it made me always like kind of made me wonder, like he obviously must have had a lot of queer friends or a queer family member, because these are not things that you come to on your own if you're just like in quote unquote straight mainstream society. Like the narrative is to push in ostracization and bigotry. And the fact that he was always like seeing those stories and seeing avenues for those stories and for those people to exist has always just been one of the most fascinating through lines of his career to me, because it's like, that's not what mainstream society is telling you when you're growing up in the 50s and 60s like he was.
And that first movie, the first movie is the one that Wes Craven was working on. Like, it is beautiful. I mean, the scene where Johnny Depp gets killed in the bed and the blood is coming up, I was like, this is horrendous, but also just like gorgeous, like a technical wonder, and obviously Wes Craven did not direct the second one, but still there's just so much to unpack from all of these from a very silly movie about a very silly villain who like is being a little weirdo, but they're able to pack in so much societal, cultural, emotional things, and it's not just gross for sake of being gross, which I really like.
I'm scared, Grady. Something is trying to get inside my body.
Yeah, and she's female and she's waiting for you in the cabana, and you want to sleep with me.
Look, I don't care if you believe me or not.
Hey, I believe you. You've had some scary dreams, okay?
No. I don't. No. I'm all messed up. What difference does it make?
So my 5-star film, now thank you so much for both of you going first. I really appreciate it.
We've never done that for anyone else.
I know.
Oh, I feel special. Okay, I feel special. And I will say I feel special because, for the record, Scream is in my top 5 favorite films of all time. So it's my number one slasher to ever slash. However, I feel like I would like to do a 5-star film, a 5-star slasher that maybe people haven't come to yet, especially in light of you guys choosing like classics of the genre. This is an opportunity for me to pivot. So obviously Scream goes without saying. I would also recommend Urban Legend from 1998, which is part of the 90s slasher resurgence, directed by Australian filmmaker Jamie Blanks. Anyway, my 5-star film is There's Somebody Inside Your House, which is a Netflix original. It came out a few years ago, 2021, and it's a slasher. It's part of this wave of literary slashers. It's based on a book by Stephanie Perkins, who thankfully is a woman writing about women. You're not going to have to get to the end of it and it's some fucking guy called Terry. Like, it's legitimately like she's writing about female trauma as a female, which is very refreshing in the literary slasher space. Anyway, it's a fucking rollicking read. And when I heard they were doing an adaptation, I was very excited because it comes from James Wan and his production company, Atomic Monster, who I think have exceptional taste and really fun taste. Things like Malignant and Night Swim and shit like that have been really like compelling and interesting to me about where they sit in the horror space. It's directed by Patrick Bryce, who did probably better known for sort of mumblecore adjacent horror films, Creep and Creep 2, which are also very good. Has one of the Duplass brothers in it. Anyway, very cute. But this slasher is set in a small town, and there's a masked killer who wears a mask of your face. So whoever he's killing, he's got a mask of that person's face, i.e. like a 3D printer type vibe or, whatever. So, like obviously once you see the killer and you're wearing the mask, you're like, oh shit, I'm the intended victim. But the whole modus operandi for the killer is about the secrets people keep and the secrets people have in this small town, and like cancelable offenses and cancel culture comes into it. But Sydney Park, who is the only Pacifica final girl I've ever fucking seen in a movie ever, is so compelling and so good, and so like she plays this character Makani. She has all of the things Neve Campbell has when she plays Sydney Prescott, in a way that I'm invested in her on screen. And the little friendship group in and around her, again, like Scream, nobody misses. Like there's no weak link in that friendship group. And yes, it's 2021. So there's like in the friendship group, there's a Black character, there's a non-binary character, there's a queer character.
Good.
There's all these different, yes, exactly, as there should be. But there's all these different archetypes, but none of them feel archetypical. They are all characters with complexities and stories and nuances. And there's real stakes to this world. It's very funny, but it's also like romantic. Like the kids fuck, and like the kids party, and the kids have sex, and it's just rich. And the soundtrack is amazing. It's got Ken Petras on it, Kilo Kish, Tierra Whack, Empress of Grizzle, Sharon Van Eaton. It's just very stylish, very compelling. I haven't been this excited about a classic slasher, that is to say one that doesn't have time travel or body swapping or Groundhog Day mechanics, since Scream, Urban Legend, I Know What You Did Last Summer. And I just really loved it, and I feel like it's really gone under the radar.
Ollie, you said this car's a piece of shit, right? Wait, what's the car got to do with it? Oh, fuck, are you serious? We have to try to help. Zach and half of our class are in that maze right now. If we clear a path, they can get out. All right. Okay, let's go save the goddamn football team!
Let us do our mixed reviews review, and then we'll get out of here into our fast forward.
My 1-star review was 1981's Halloween 2.
My 1-star review was a tie between 2010's Don't Go in the Woods and 2014's Stage Fright.
And my 1-star review was 2009's My Bloody Valentine 3D.
My 5-star review was 1978's Halloween.
My 5-star review was 1984's A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge.
And my 5-star review was 2021's There's Someone Inside Your House.
There's a stranger in the house.
I really want you guys to watch that movie. I feel like you'd like it. Anyway, separate.
Yeah. We'll write you a book report afterwards.
yeah, we have homework now.
Yeah, let's get into our fast forward. The aforementioned Totally Killer is out now on Amazon. The Blackening has just hit streaming. Chucky is alive and well on TV. Like there is no end to slashers nowadays.
Right. I mean, Scream seems to be like in a new pendulum swing of cultural relevance, and people are just really into it. I will say I have not seen a Scream in about 6 entries.
Well, let me tell you, there is only 6. So
there are?
Yeah, there's 6, but I will say there is a Scream TV series that has 3 seasons, of which the 3rd season has no connection to season 1 or 2, so hard pivot. But and it becomes anthological by season 3. But season 1 is very good, very compelling.
Okay,
They've tried to make the slashers happen on TV for a while. There was that TV series called Slasher, which is now also gone anthological, and there's a few others sort of floating around. But Scream Queens was very Glee with blood.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember when Ryan Murphy created the horror comedy, as he so claimed?
Yeah, he did it. He was the one who did it.
He did it. There was none before him.
He did it, Joe. He did it.
Hate him so much. Anyways.
Yeah,
but you're right about Scream being back into cultural relevancy, because Scream 6 is a film that came out in 2023. I feel like this year has gone for 10 decades, so it's a little bit hard to reconcile that Scream 6 is one of the big box office hits of this year. Like, that's wild.
Yeah.
Wild thing to say, like, after all these years. It's nearly fucking 30 years since Scream came out. Like, what?
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, it just feels like, you know, we've talked a little bit about like the modern movies and like the subversion of the genre with the time, you know, like Totally Killer is basically made to be like, she goes back in time and she's like, okay, let's catch the killer now. And they're like, LOL, what's DNA? Or like, she's like, I think the best parts of those movies, or that movie, is like, she goes to the high school and is like, do you need my records? And they're like, bitch, get to class, we do not care. Like, and she's just like, the 80s were crazy, like, no wonder, like, you could just do whatever. But you know, yeah, the body swapping, the ground, like the Happy Death Day stuff, even like getting into like having more openly queer characters, you know, the whole premise of The Blackening is of like, we can't all be the first to die. And so like having these more underrepresented, othered classes of people, where it's not just like this white anxiety stuff going on, but like these more specific things to these other groups of people. I think it's so interesting and so clever, like all these ways that we're like the entry into these horror stories now. It's exciting.
And that's the important thing. That's what's going to keep the genre going, is that there is now room for these other voices, that it isn't just about straight white men being like, people just show up because I want to see boobs. There's room for women's voices. And like, we didn't even really talk about Slumber Party Massacre, but it was like the first big slasher movie directed by a woman. Amy Holden Jones is her name, I believe. Somebody might want to correct me on that. But the you know, there's more room for women like her, and there's more room for people of color, and there's more room for queer voices. And I think that's where like everything needs to be, because if not, we're gonna have the same five things. Like, I once again love Freddy, but like Chucky, the only thing that literally is saving Chucky right now, why he's moved back into the mainstream, is because the man who created Chucky is a gay man and can finally like really express that. And so it has more interesting queer themes. So I'm just looking forward to it becoming, I was right, Amy Holden Jones.
Yeah, I was to say, yeah, you got
it. I think that to me is more interesting, and it's keeping me interested in the genre as it like moves and adapts and becomes. But you know, because to me it's got, like, I love the gimmicks, like I do love the time travel, the body swap, like it's all fun. But you know, if we're really gonna go somewhere, I think it's just like gonna come from these other voices instead of it just being white men.
Yeah, what I also love, we talked about this a little earlier, is like a lot of these modern movies, like the girlies are fighting back. Like these, the idea that like a man could just come into my house and kill you, certainly a thing. But in Totally Killer, fucking Julie Bowen says, "Bitch, I've been training.
Oh my God.
Don't fuck with me."
Such a great bit, because it's like this whole thing of like, she's the moment when she's like, I've been worried about getting murdered since I was 16. I'm fucking ready. I was like, hello, are you me? I have a switchblade on my key ring. I sleep with a baseball bat next to my bed. Like, I have a strategy and a scheme to get out of this. Like, I don't go to box fit classes for pleasure. I go there. So if I'm going to get murdered, if I die, I die. But I'm going to make sure there's so much DNA under my fingerprints and that person's astrological sign and their address and a description of them sketched next to the body. Like, I'm going full Da Vinci Code, where I'm like drawing symbols and shit next to me in the fucking Louvre.
But it's like, it's, you know, the Halloween reboot is also in this vibe. Like, Laurie Strode is like ready to fight back, but even like in Freaky, you know, and Happy Death Day, like she's trying to, like, these girlies are trying to fight back. And The Blackening, they're fighting back. And so I also like the idea of, you know, just not like these like wimpy innocent little victims who like can't defend themselves.
Or even, I know you haven't seen it yet, but even the newest Scream 6, they finally had like a Gale Weathers versus Ghostface knockdown drag out, and she's like maybe not the best at holding her own, but she's fucking fighting for her life.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really believe it. And you believe, like, she's fighting for her life, like, one injectable at a time. Like, her honest to God face has never looked worse.
Not
and
one
I'm
wrinkle.
like, I truly just can't take one more headline about how she's like, I realized I went too far in the 2000s, so I dissolved all my filters. And then you see her in a film and you're like, did you? Did you? Like, what's going on here? It's crazy.
I will say this. One thing that certainly does bug me about modern slashers, and I do think the groundwork was laid over the years, but I do think there is sort of a reliance on guns in a really unpleasant way. I don't mind a surprise gun.
Yeah.
I think it really works in the original Scream when there's suddenly a gun introduced and it's like, oh fuck, like now, but like in like part 5, a big part of the marketing campaign was even like
Ghostface has got a
like,
gun now.
yeah, or well, like 5 was when Sydney was like, you know, I'm Sydney fucking Prescott. Of course I own a gun. And I was like, yeah,
well, but also
it's
like in the first movie, like Ghostface doesn't have a gun. He has a gun when they're revealed. Like those are now just the boys that have a gun.
And that was also like Ghostface was fucking clumsy. As a masked villain, Ghostface was not Michael Myers. It was not an insurmountable foe that you couldn't get the best of. You see,
you can knock him down.
Exactly. And like you see Tatum nearly get the better of him with beer bottles. You see Sarah Michelle Gellar, you know, hit him with a fucking bike. It's like that's actually part of what makes it quite scary is that so many times they nearly succeed and they nearly get away. And it's just like, it doesn't fully manifest oftentimes in their survival. But like, that is one of the things that was really new and compelling and fresh about Scream is that the masked killer wasn't infallible. Like they were goofy. They tripped over, they made mistakes. Okay. Yes. And the first one, it's revealed to be teenage boys, like, you know, the most stupidest version of humanity.
Yeah,
True straight teenage boys, I guess. But, you know, as the franchise
as 2 guys
goes
that
on,
were once teens. Yeah.
Yeah, like believable.
Yeah, it's fun. And I haven't seen Pearl and X because I'm scared. But it does feel like we are now in the A24ification era of slashers also. And people seem to really like those. And so, yeah.
X is really fun. X is basically like a little homage to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it's like a very progressive, horny, like I didn't find it scary at all, I must say, but that's okay. I'm not going to a horror movie to be like, I must be scared. I want a good story first. And if there's some good scares in there, I'm delighted. You know what I mean? Like there are some great scares and talk to me, but the story was one of the things that sort of like let me down. I would be like, I'll have a few less scares if the story can like match. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
I want them to be holding their hands in that regard. And same with Pearl. It's like, yeah, it's more of a drama really that just has some pretty gnarly deaths in it. But fucking X is a banger.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up too about the A24ification because I think Maria was just saying this too as well, where like I have a problem with a lot of modern horror where like it's like I think horror needs to remember that it is also about like entertainment. And like, and I'm not saying like be super gross and entertain, but like make your audience entertain. And that's a lot of the A24 horror doesn't do a lot for me because a lot of it's just like,
yeah, like how often are you like home from work on a Tuesday and you're like, man, I need to unwind. Let me just put on Hereditary. Like, get fucked. Right. That's not an unwind rewatchable. I'm, you know, like, I love Midsummer, but I'm like, we're watching that at a specific sleepover. It's not something
it's not a feel-good time.
Right. But something like, you know, The Black Phone, more recent, I actually feel like that weirdly is and even Candyman 2021 by Nina Costa, those are more rewatchable because there is a mystery element to them. In the same way that people rewatch Silence of the Lambs, it's like there needs to be like an additional twist, an additional turn where it's not just like horror for horror's sake. I don't know many people who are like
bad vibes.
Like, yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know, Hereditary, like great, but fucking I'm not baking a cake and with nuts in it to like sit down and watch that bad boy.
But yeah, I think that brings us to the natural conclusion of a slashers episode. None of us were revealed to be the killer. All of us were revealed to be the final girl.
We're the final
We've
girls.
made it.
We made it.
I mean, to be honest, I'm a fucking mixed race woman with big tits. I know I'm dying at the end of the first act at best, if not in the opening. Like, let's be real.
Please. I mean, I can't even run half a block. I know I'm out. So that's
Gavin, you're the killer. Don't be crazy.
I know, I'm the killer. That's fine,
Look at this
whatever.
little candelabra. Big killer energy in the background there.
But Maria, thank you so much for doing this. First of all, I want to make sure that you have a moment to plug everything and anything that you're doing. And I know you're doing so much, so I don't want to let you do that now.
The Graveyard Shift is really the only thing I want to plug at the moment. If you enjoyed this episode and you enjoy spooky season and you enjoy horror, no matter what time of year it is, please read The Graveyard Shift. You can buy it, you can listen to the audiobook, you can borrow it from your local library, whatever is your chosen form of accessing it. I would love that so much. And if you like the book or you hate it, either or, please flick us a review, because every review, whether it's on Amazon or iBooks or Goodreads or whatever, helps just bump it up a little bit further for people to read it. We got an endorsement from Patton Oswalt, which was really cool, who's like one of my big genre heroes.
That's amazing.
That was lovely. I know, I fucking died. I was literally running around the publisher's office going, "We got Ratatouille, bitch!" And that meant they're British, so that meant nothing to them. But for somebody who grew up like loving Silver Screen Fiend, which was his book basically all about films and specifically horror movies, it was like a bit of a, oh my God moment. I also worked on this audio documentary about superheroes, specifically the first superhero, called The Phantom Never Dies. It's a 6-episode show. You can access that on Spotify, podcast, whatever, however you seek that stuff out. And I don't know, fucking find me on socials if you want to. No stress. I'm on Instagram and I refuse to call it what it's now known as, but I'm on Instagram and Twitter. So just look up Maria Lewis and you'll find me.
Excellent.
Yeah, I pulled the trigger and deleted my Twitter. I couldn't do it. I was like,
good for you. Jesus, take the wheel.
Yeah, we love a self-help queen.
Yeah, value
exactly.
yourself.
I lit some candles, murdered some co-eds. It's fine.
Perfect.
But thank you so much. Seriously, you are such a joy and such a delight, and I mean, we're so honored to have you here.
Yeah,
so thank you for agreeing to do this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And like, what a fun journey to just chart the history of slashers. It's
Gavin,
just like truly delightful.
The way Gavin was like, so there's this woman who does want to do slashers. Is that okay? And I was like,
I was very hand-holdy with Louis. I'm like,
yeah, I think I did pretty well, and I found some movies that I really enjoyed. So I appreciate you bringing slasher films to us.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for both being on board for it. How reluctant that may have been initially.
And speaking of Twitters that have yet to be deleted, you can always find us on Twitter at The Mixed Reviews.
We're on Facebook just type in The Mixed Reviews.
If you want to email us, you can always email us little love letters at reviewsmixed@gmail.com.
We're also on Instagram at _mixed_reviews.
And if you want to listen to our back catalog, we have a plethora of episodes, and you can find us on any major podcast app: Apple, Spotify, Google, Audible. We're there in all the places. And you can find us on Patreon to see these beautiful video episodes. Look at this,
honey.
I'm wearing my little gay skeleton shirt. Yeah.
The thing is, he is. Also, finish up this episode and then go back to our other Halloween episodes. One of my favorite of all time is our zombies episode. It bangs.
Yeah. You talk about the zombie episode every year. It makes the other episodes feel inadequate. Just saying.
Okay, fine. Werewolves was good too. Vampires was pretty good. We did Ghosts. Ghosts was hard, but it was fun.
Yeah, Ghosts was hard.
But thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next month. And we'll be in the holiday season. Ooh. Bye, everyone.
Mariah's defrosting. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Mariah is defrosting.
When it was over, I said, yo, that was death. And everything seemed all right when we left. But when I got home and laid down to sleep, that began the nightmare on my street.